Let's yap pragmatism. Um, Often, or for many decades, I guess, conceived, and maybe even people still think of it this way, some people, as a or the characteristically American philosophy. Um, it's practicalism. Like, it seems to represent an American can-do attitude. I just want to say that I use all these kinds of characterizations of the American ethos or personality or character under a kind of erasure. I would be critical of all these narratives, actually. On the other hand, though, they all maybe have they bite in reality here and there. Um, I do think, pragmatism is quite a can-do philosophy. That doesn't give you much in the way of content. And it's quite an optimistic philosophy. A future-oriented philosophy in a kind of positive vein. Different pragmatists do this in different forms. Now, it would be nice to, spend now maybe a Ken Burns documentary series giving you the changing context from 1850. Like when we've been reading Emerson or Frederick Douglass, both of whom lived into the late 19th century. And America in 1890 or 1900. An entirely transformed culture in many, many ways by industrial capitalism. The high watermark of industrial capitalism, let's say 1900. Okay, Emerson was not dealing with that in 1850. Right? The post-Civil War era is a lot different in all sorts of ways, and in the intellectual world too. The culture is transformed. It's sea to shining sea. Again, I don't want to be taken to be going jingoistic on you. And the frontier is closed. Okay, there's 1,000 cliches here. But there's very rapid development in culture and technology. And one of those things is that these figures are, they're pretty effortlessly cosmopolitan in the sense that, now we're dealing with Harvard professors, University of Chicago professors, Dewey. James was at Harvard. Spent part of his career near Harvard anyway. His father was a professor at Harvard of mathematics. And fully professional philosophy, I guess you'd say, for what that's worth, for better and for worse. Okay. But still in a kind of almost self-consciously American grain, though, or quite self-consciously. There are many sorts of connections between the transcendentalists and the pragmatists. Again, maybe the characteristically or the historical American philosophies, or two of them anyway. I'm not sure that there is a characteristically American philosophy now. I don't know if that's good or bad. All right. But, I guess basically academic philosophy at this point is more or less has a pretty good international churn. And, you wouldn't be contributing to a philosophy journal today definitely not an analytic philosophy, for example, in self-consciously as an American. Do you see what I mean? I'm engaged in these things, and maybe I'm sort of aware in the back of my mind that I might be an American. But that's not going to affect my work in analytic epistemology, right? At least not consciously. Um, well, that's a good question, though. Like, the influence of landscape on ideas or something. That's something Emerson was pretty into, for example. But I'm not sure that, I'm not sure I have a lot interesting to say about that, or at least I have a bunch of things to say about it, maybe, but nothing that would get you from, oh, look at that hill over there, to here's my theory of knowledge. Okay, like that hill over there, as opposed to an alpine hill in Germany or something. But anyway, so this might be the end of a characteristically American philosophy, but it's also at the same time self-consciously addressed to an international philosophical audience, and it's kind of grappling with the classical philosophical issues at the highest level of generality or whatever. Okay. Now, it shares a lot with analytic philosophy. I don't know what you're thinking about this, but or what you know about analytic philosophy, sort of the dominant style of philosophy in the American Academy for the last 50 years or more. God, it's more than that now. 70, 80. One thing they're both responding to is, I say they're both responding to an internal and an external kind of problem. The internal problem within philosophy that both the pragmatists and the early analytic philosophers like Russell and Moore, G.E. Moore, faced was the kind of exhaustion and also the kind of character of the German idealism that dominated 19th century academic philosophy. It didn't seem to, first of all, it didn't seem to have any practical results, though it often claimed to in one way or another. And secondly, it seemed like uselessly, bizarrely abstract. And in fact, it struck a lot of people as straight up meaningless. Okay, so like when Hegel is going on about the absolute spirit working itself out in history, in human history, people like G.E. Moore and people like C.S. Peirce were going, okay, so if the absolute were working itself out in history, how would I know that? Okay, like what would I expect to be different if the absolute was working itself out in world history than if it wasn't? Okay, is there any practical upshot to that? In fact, does it mean anything? Okay, and so actually, there's a lot of overlap between kind of a pragmatist and what came to be called logical positivist, which I'm teaching in my other class, theory of meaning. But they're also not the same thing. Siri keeps popping up on me, Here she is again. How can I get rid of you? Okay, yeah. I hear people yell at their digital assistants. I try to just avoid digital assistants, but they keep popping up no matter what I do. And then I yell them down. Okay, all right. Fascinating stuff, eh? Okay, very briefly. Here's the three major figures, the three classical pragmatist figures. This is a whole world of thought, though. And, it's kind of a shame. I mean, even these three figures are not read as much as they ought to be, if you ask me, in philosophy right now. But, the rest of the figures have often been forgotten completely or whatever. But this was a whole world of a lot of really excellent philosophical work, actually. So the idea of pragmatism, or the pragmatism as a philosophy, was invented, according to William James, who made it famous, by C.S. Peirce. That's P-E-I-R-C-E, and we're pronouncing it Peirce. Okay, so don't get that wrong. And in the 1870s, so this is pretty, that's early. Now, if someone were to argue, and I have heard this argued, that C.S. Peirce was the greatest American philosopher, I think that's not implausible. Right? I mean, just to like actually, I think like in some ways you could still read C.S. Peirce and get ideas that are, stunningly anticipate later developments, or that you might look at and hope that they will still stunningly influence later developments. I think, for example, that even in the 1860s, Peirce was putting forward a version of what's now called externalism about mental content, doubting like the internal theater of ideas and shit like this, right? Yeah, we found that again in the 90s or whatever, 1990s. Okay, and he was a great innovator in logic. It's often said that Gottlob Frege in Germany revolutionized logic more profoundly than it had been shifted since Aristotle. Frege and Peirce are contemporaries, and Peirce did very much the same thing at the same time. It's quite similar to Newton and Leibniz inventing the calculus. Peirce and Frege simultaneously, like maybe the same year, they published, I have to look this up again, they published versions of quantified logic. We could just start, that I'll just leave it at that. Okay. Amazing achievement. And Peirce gave rise to pragmatism, largely, I think. Like I say, James attributed it to him, and he attributed it to him as having invented it in the 1870s. Now, Peirce and James knew each other. Peirce was a very problematic person, had a very difficult time. He was fired from Johns Hopkins because he was living with a woman that was not his wife. Stuff like that, okay? So, and he had a struggle of an academic career. And he was evidently a very difficult person to deal with. And you can even see this in some of the stuff we'll look at, maybe. Okay. And, I should give you some of his background. It's basically a scientific background, actually. Like I say, his father was a professor of mathematics at Harvard. Peirce did, some interesting scientific work as a young man before he ever launched on this almost like theory of science. That's almost what he conceived pragmatism to be, largely. A philosophy that could take account of scientific practice. Man, the late 19th century all over was just this period of scientism. And that was a threat to philosophy in a way. Because like scientism could be characterized as the view that only science provides knowledge. And that is supported by a lot of the pragmatic results of science, you see. Like it happens, man. It's real. So that everyone is kind of responding to that at a certain point around the turn of the century or before. And I think we're in another period similar to that in a way. I don't know what effects this one will have. All right. So William James is the brother of the great novelist, fiction writer Henry James. I think I said this on a previous lecture maybe, but his godfather was Ralph Waldo Emerson. Henry James's and William James's dad. There was another sibling too. Was a friend of Emerson's. So there's connections, strands of connections with the Transcendentalists. William James also, as well, was one of the most eminent psychologists of the late 19th century. His work, Principles of Psychology, vast work, which has many philosophical implications. It's still a brilliant thing to read, I think, in a lot of ways. Was a standard text in the field of psychology for many years. Of course, it's been superseded. Although, it hasn't been superseded as bad as a lot of late 19th century psychology, which was horrendous bullshit, really, even by the standards of later psychologists. But or even it stood up better than Freud, if you ask me. All right, he was older than Freud, though. Okay, and he kind of mutated into a philosopher. He always had philosophical leanings, and sort of became a beloved American figure too, a preeminent American intellectual figure, a little Emersonian in this sense. What a great lecturer, and what a wonderful writer. Okay, he can put really deep and pretty precise philosophical ideas in lovely prose that would be a pleasure to listen to in a lecture, really. Which is not that surprising from Henry James's brother. Honestly, I think he writes better than Henry James, but that's maybe just because I don't like Henry James that much. But yeah, it's a great model of philosophical writing, I think. Okay, and so he kind of embodied pragmatism. Now, according to Peirce, he also they knew each other throughout much of their lives, and according to Peirce, James completely misunderstood pragmatism as he had put it forward. This is a little like Wittgenstein telling. Well, anyway, never mind. And so Peirce ended up renaming his own philosophy Pragmatism, which he said was a name ugly enough not to be stolen. And when he was saying stuff like this about James, in print, and more savagely in person, I think, in letters, maybe, James was supporting him financially. And Peirce was kind of totally dysfunctional, actually, like living in some kind of old rundown house in rural PA. Okay, and so they were, I don't know. It was, like I say, Peirce was a prickly, difficult dude. I think actually Hopkins has the distinction of having non-renewed both Peirce and Dewey. Okay, good job. Okay, and then I guess we'll just say John Dewey. Known, among other things, as a great theorist of education, one of the central figures if you were taking a philosophy of education course. And he ran experimental schools and stuff like this. Originally from Vermont. I don't know how much bio am I doing? Not much. Maybe I'll do more as we introduce each text by each figure. But lived a long, long life, and probably through the first half of the 20th century, more or less, or after the death of James, even maybe, he was probably the best known American philosopher. He tackled every issue in philosophy. He had a long book on aesthetics. Books on ethics, multiple books on ethics. Kind of an anti-metaphysical metaphysics called Experience in Nature, etc. Probably, like I say, kind of the top American philosopher until the whole thing was swamped by the analyticians. Though pragmatism ended up having quite a bit of influence on analytic philosophy, even just because of the fact that, if you were a young prospective analytic philosopher taking classes in 1950 or 60 at an Ivy League school or whatever it might be, your professors were liable to be pragmatists. All right, and there's a lot of overlap. C.I. Lewis is an interesting figure. My mentor Richard Rorty kind of straddled these worlds. I know mentor might be the wrong word, but he supervised my dissertation. There's elements of pragmatism in Klein. I don't know how much these figures signify to you, but okay. Now, what is pragmatism? that would take a long run, actually, to do it responsibly. But let me run a simple version of it, or try to. Pragmatism is a theory of meaning. Meaning of terms, meaning of sentences, meaning of theories. Okay. And second, a theory of truth. You know, what it is for a proposition or a theory, let's say, to be true. And it enters the list after it's articulated as a theory of truth as sort of maybe one of the primary options in the history of philosophy for a theory of truth, like an alternative to the correspondence and coherence theories. As a theory of meaning, let's just sketch this out. Now, I'll do a handout. I'm quite swamped today, but I'll try to remember to do a handout soon, kind of assembling some of these basic quotes, just basic characterizations of pragmatism by the classical figures. So, again, James ascribes the invention of pragmatism to Peirce, and in fact, in this piece, How to Make Our Ideas Clear, of 1878. And this is putting forward pragmatism as a theory of meaning. From all these sophisms, philosophy, metaphysics, okay, we shall be perfectly safe so long as we reflect that the whole function of thought is to produce habits of action. Thought is subordinate to action. It's instrumental to action. The question isn't whether the thought is true in some kind of pure correspondence to the world phase or something like this, or mode. It's what we can do with it. That's why we think. And they have they've taken on Darwinianism and stuff like this completely. Okay, Peirce is magnificently aware of the whole world's scientific literature, as he writes. Actually, quite the polymath, and so this is a naturalistic, first of all, conception of human thought. The reason we think at all is to adapt to an environment and to act successfully in the environment. That whatever there is connected with a thought, but irrelevant to its purpose, to its practical purpose, is an accretion to it, but no part of it. If there be a unity among our sensations which has no reference to how we shall act on a given occasion, as when we listen to a piece of music, why we do not call that thinking. Okay, so maybe like listening to a piece of music, you come back into the present moment and you're just enjoying the sensations you're having. Right? Well, that's not thinking, because thinking is necessarily future-oriented in a way. That's what it's for in creatures like us, to help us act successfully in our environments. To develop its meaning, develop the meaning of any notion, of any object, of any concept, we have, therefore, simply to determine what habits it produces. What habits it produces. The emphasis on habit here might be a little misleading. But anyway, for what a thing means is simply what habit it involves, what habits it involves. Now, the identity of a habit depends on how it might lead us to act, not merely under such circumstances as are likely to arise, but under such as might possibly occur, no matter how improbable they may be. So in other words, like we sort of stockpile ideas, even philosophical ideas to the extent that they are meaningful, to enable us to grapple with our experience, including to have a stock to grapple with possible experiences that we'll have in the future. We're not absolutely certain at the moment what we'll need to grapple with reality in the future. And so that's how human beings came to kind of stockpile apparently abstract ideas, for example. Like this is why philosophy happened, maybe. But philosophy might be a deranged overdevelopment of that capacity, where you're piling up useless metaphysical claims, actually. Right? And it finally gets beyond the point where it could help you adapt to anything in the world. I'm not sure Hegelian philosophy really helps you adapt to something in the world. Maybe it does. And then, for Peirce, it's going to be meaningless. What the habit is depends on when and how it causes us to act. As for when, every stimulus to action is derived from perception. As for the how, every purpose of action is to produce some sensible result in the world. I mean, we could say that meaning is teleological. The meaning of an idea is what you can do with it in your experience, or what it helps you do in experience. Thus, we come down to what is tangible and conceivably practical as the root of every real distinction of thought. We come down to what is tangible and conceivably practical as the root of every real distinction of thought, no matter how subtle it may be, and there is no distinction of meaning so fine as to consist in anything but a possible difference of practice. Or this. Consider what effects that might conceivably have practical bearings we conceive the object of our conception to have. Then our conception of these effects is the whole of our conception of the object. Or we could say the meaning of like the term that picks out the object is our conception of the possible effects of that object. Consider what effects that might conceivably have practical bearings we conceive the object of our conception, the object of our idea, to have. Then our conception of these object of our concept. Then our conception of these effects is the whole of our conception of the object. Okay, now the questions of meaning, the issues of meaning, the issue of meaning and the issue of truth are really closely bound up in philosophy in general, okay, or in the world in general. Like if you don't know what something means, you don't know whether it's true. That's for sure. And it's maybe that sometimes the meaning of a claim is held to be identical to its truth conditions. That is, a claim means what would make it true. Yeah, I don't know. That wasn't the clearest formulation. Maybe this is kind of an unclear doctrine in some ways. But so meaning and truth have to be conceived as connected. I'm not going to try to connect them fully here with regard to this material. So the meaning of any term, let's try it that way, is its practical effects. So for example, how about the term God? Peirce is not going to say that that's necessarily meaningless. It might be meaningless in some of its uses. Like if you mean a completely transcendent being who has no, is not visible in the world, and whose being or not being would be compatible with anything that happened, then yeah, that's just an inert metaphysical something that has no effect and no meaning. But now if you mean, and James took it in this direction, Peirce maybe didn't quite like this particular move. Maybe God means what the conception does in your life. Like say it makes you, maybe it makes the difference between despair and hope. Okay, now maybe not for Peirce, but for James, that would be a significant pragmatic effect of the conception. And the conception might not necessarily be meaningless in that kind of case. Right. But anyway, so let's look at a couple of canonical statements of the pragmatic theory of truth from James and Dewey. This is James from What Pragmatism Means, which we'll read. Truth in our ideas and beliefs means the same thing that it means in science, says James. I mean, I really think the way science is rolling up into philosophy at this moment is decisive in a number of developments around this period all over the world. It means, they say, it means, the pragmatists say, nothing but this. Truth means this, that ideas become true just insofar as they help us get into satisfactory relation with other parts of our experience. Ideas become true. Ideas become true just insofar as they help us get into a satisfactory relation with other parts of our experience. Any idea upon which we can ride, so to speak, any idea that will carry us prosperously from any one part of our experience to any other part, linking things satisfactorily, working securely, simplifying, saving labor, is true for just so much, is true for just so much, true insofar forth, true instrumentally. You can think about whether you think that's, you can think about whether you can think about counterexamples to that. Things that are true that don't have worthwhile effects, maybe. Okay. Let us now say this, that truth is one species of good, and not, as is usually supposed, a category distinct from good and coordinate with it. The truth is one species of good. It's a value. The true is the name of whatever proves itself to be good in the way of belief. The true is the name of whatever proves itself to be good in the way of belief. And good, too, for definite assignable reasons. Okay. So for one thing, yeah, we're he's quite consciously sort of connecting moral and epistemic value, the value of truth with the value of goodness, including moral goodness, but above all, sort of practical usefulness. Okay, like being a good knife is being good at cutting and stuff like this. Good in that sense. Being a good umbrella is one that really actually shelters you from the rain and doesn't, blow inside out or whatever. Maybe good in that sense. The true is the good in belief, in the way that, keeping the rain off your head is a good what makes for a good umbrella. Maybe truth is an umbrella in that sense. I don't know. Or here we have one of Dewey's formulations. This is from Reconstruction in Philosophy. I think this is maybe about 1921, maybe. 20. So it's a little bit later. Did I say a date on the James? I want to say about 1905. So that's quite a bit later than Peirce, right? By the time you get to 1920, it's already 50 years beyond, it's 40 years at least after Peirce has articulated this. And there's been a whole history in between. If ideas, this is John Dewey, if ideas in Reconstruction and philosophy, I think I have my grandfather's copy right here. My grandfather, Murray Gitlin, took classes with John Dewey at Columbia. If ideas, meanings, conceptions, notions, theories, systems are instrumental to an active reorganization of the given environment, to a removal of some specific trouble and perplexity, and this is the way Peirce actually characterizes truth in terms of resolving problematic situations, or in Dewey's parlance, the removal of some specific trouble or perplexity, then the test of their validity, ideas, meanings, conceptions, notions, theories, systems, then the test of their validity and value lies in accomplishing this work. Active reorganization of the environment. If they succeed in their office, they are reliable, sound, valid, good, true. If they fail to clear up confusion, to eliminate defects, if they increase confusion, uncertainty, and evil, again, the moral valence, the value valence here, when they are acted upon, then they are false. Confirmation, corroboration, verification lie in works, consequences. Handsome is that handsome does. By their fruits shall ye know them. That which guides us truly is true. Demonstrated capacity for such guidance is what we mean by, what is meant by truth. All right, so that's just a couple quotes and thousands of problems and interesting examples and difficulties arise. So we'll be into this material next week. Please read the Peirce selections.